Thank you, Aneska, for that Bible reading. Friends, it's wonderful you can join us today. My name's Mark Collins. If I haven't met you before, a special hello and welcome. And as you might know, we've been looking at this series called The Barefoot Disciple. Now, maybe somebody up the back made some jokes that I should take off my shoes today and walk around in bare feet. I've decided not to do that, but that's okay. But obviously, when we first started off this series, we heard that actually for the author, Yoel Frank, however you want to pronounce that first name, good luck, who wrote The Barefoot Disciple, got his motivation after reading the famous investment book called The Barefoot Investor by Scott Pape. Now, there are so many financial books, so many financial apps, so many financial products, so many financial shows, so many financial advisors, so many financial organisations, so much information out there on how to manage our finances. But with all this information, well, sometimes Christians can forget to think about how we steward our finances to God's glory in the life stage which we find ourselves in. See, maybe you've never heard a teaching series on this topic before, or even known that there are actually Christian books on this topic. Now, one thing that I've been keeping up my sleeve is a podcast called Money, Faith and Finance. And this podcast is by Hope 103.2, has been running since 2022. And there are two Christian guys who interview a bunch of people each week on various money, faith and finance topics. One presenter is Ben McKecken. He's also a presenter on Hope 103.2, and he goes to an Anglican church in Annandale. And the other presenter of the podcast is called Pete Burrows. And this guy is an accountant. He's an associate with an accounting firm in Penrith. So he must be a great guy, right, if he works in Penrith. Now, this is a brilliant podcast if you want to know more about the value and impact of money on your life. So whether it's weighing up housing affordability or daring to ask if Christians can be rich, this podcast well explores the practical and profound of our relationship with money. And there's also a Facebook group if that's your thing. So money, faith and finance, may I recommend that to you. But by now, over the last 3 sermons in this series, we should understand how important it is to be a growing disciple with our financial resources. But as we probably know, it's not always the easiest thing, because there's lots of advice outside Christian circles and very little advice inside Christian circles. So today we come to the end of our series, and we're going to talk about investing and stewarding wisely. Not to get rich, but to increase our generosity towards people and ministry. So let's look at what Jesus says in Matthew 25 about what we do while we wait for his return. And then we'll find out more about wise stewarding and investing of our financial resources. So first, the parable of the talents, or the bag of gold, depending on your Bible translation. See, the Bible translation I have, the NIV, which we usually read in church, well, it uses bag of gold as a way of quantifying how much a talent was. See, the footnote in my Bible says a talent was worth about 20 years of a day labourer's wage. So I looked up Google, and it told me the average salary for a general labourer in Australia is around $70,000 per year. Times that by 20, well, it gives you around $1.4 million. And that's pretty close to the median house price for a 5-bedroom house in Marsden Park. So the parable is talking about significant amounts of money. One servant, well, he gets 5 houses. Another gets 2 houses, and the final one, well, he gets 1 house. Now, obviously, these servants weren't your run-of-the-mill servants in a household. They were more like high-end managers in a company which were responsible for investing the owner's money with an expectation of a good financial return. Now, while this parable on the surface seems to be talking about money, there's a deeper understanding that comes from the context of Matthew 24 and 25. It's set in apocalyptic terms as Jesus speaks about the future for his disciples before he goes to the cross and rises again. What will happen to his disciples? Well, his followers are told to wait in a certain way for the kingdom of heaven to come. See, when God created the heaven and the earth in Genesis chapter 1, then sin caused problems in Genesis chapter 3. Well, the plan was that heaven and earth were always going to be reunited when Jesus comes back again. And this day, well, it means both wonderful news for those who have waited and acted on Jesus' words, but it's also an awful day for those who don't trust in him. See, what will happen? Well, the rich master will generously share his riches and his joy with his faithful servants who have acted on his word, believed, and followed him. He'll give more generously to his faithful servants than they actually deserve. But that's the point. Because as we've been talking about in this series, we actually follow a generous God who has given his Son to save us. So how do we wait for Jesus' return? Well, like a good servant who is faithful to his master's tasks, doing what the master wants, no matter if the master's there or not. See, in the context of the parable, well, Jesus' disciples have a choice. Will they listen and obey Jesus' words and then inherit eternal life? Or like other Israelites at the time, will they choose to reject Jesus and rely on their religious heritage? See, friends, if we don't, like those Israelites didn't trust in Jesus, then sadly we face an awful judgment, which is actually described in verse 30. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's not a very nice picture, is it, friends? But then if we go back a bit, well, we see in verse 19, we're reminded actually that the waiting period for Jesus' return will be long. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. And as we know, no one knows the day or the hour when Jesus will return. But what has God done in his mercy? Well, he's given sufficient time for many, many, many millions of people to trust in his son Jesus. So the master settles the account. We see 2 of the 3 servants have made very wise investment decisions, and they've made a good return, while one does nothing but put the money under the bed and hope for the best. And obviously the master isn't pleased with this lazy servant. His master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gathered where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest." Jesus gives a little bit of financial advice, doesn't he, in verse 27? But then he moves on to what his faithful followers and those who don't follow him should expect on the day that he returns. Verse 29, "For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken away from them." How are you going to wait for Jesus' return? Yes, we need to grow in our faith, but we're also called to be fruitful, growing by putting our faith into action. And that's holistic. It's not just a Sunday thing, but it's how you live your life for Jesus during the week. How you use the good gifts that Jesus has given you, your time, your talents and treasures. And now, as we know, we can't cover every aspect of the Christian life in every single sermon, but God willing, over time, we'll hear and read for ourselves about how Jesus wants us to live. Now, I do want to acknowledge people in this church who use their time and talents generously to serve the Lord. But I think we've heard lots of sermons with application about serving, and probably not that many with application about how we use our treasures, our financial resources to honour Jesus, grow his kingdom and serve others. So we need to think wisely about how we steward our financial resources in the life stage we find ourselves in. Now, to do this, I'm going to explain some practical examples which mostly come from the Barefoot Disciple, but even better, our friend Paul Collis, as maybe Steve rudely said before, I'm more on the positive side, is going to come up and speak from his life experience. Now, Paul's an accountant, but he's not here to give financial advice. Either am I. But he's here to describe how things have worked for him from when he was young to now in semi-retirement. Now, I'm not going to have Paul come up right away. Just wait a moment, Paul, because I've got a few more words to speak before Paul comes up. See, these examples that I'm going to talk about, they are examples that move us just beyond what we spoke about in the first two sermons. Beyond our buckets of money, our spend, save and serve. And beyond just being generous to our family, our church and people in need. See, these examples are about increasing our generosity. Increasing our generosity. Now, first, what can a Christian do? Well, a Christian can invest in others for non-financial outcomes. And the Barefoot Disciple, it calls this kingdom venturing. Now, if you remember the Hakuna Matata choir who came at Easter, they were lots of fun, but they came with a purpose of raising funds to build another school in Kenya. And people gave generously at this church and many others towards this project, which is now taking shape. It could be giving to our Anglicare Toys and Tucker appeal. This kingdom venturing is about stretching your generosity towards those investments in God's kingdom which, well, they return kingdom outcomes. The second thing you can do, well, you could choose to do a direct ministry investment, which might look like directly investing in people who you know or buildings for ministry. Now, in most cases, churches already have buildings to meet in. We're a little bit different at this stage, but our building is slowly progressing. So maybe prioritising investing in people who you know who will grow ministry is really important. Last week, well, Adam spoke about Esther's work at Sydney Uni. People here have invested in Christine throughout her time at college. Some here directly financially support missionaries like Ryan and Lynn Verghese. Investing in people who will return a kingdom benefit through their current and future ministry is important. Now, you can even use tax legislation to better steward your money when doing a direct ministry investment. In some cases, you can give to a person through a tax-deductible fund. And that's why at this church, well, we have our MTS Student Ministers Fund, and now we have a tax-deductible SRE fund, which invests directly in people doing these ministries. And the SRE fund also invests in workbooks and teaching materials for children in these classes. See, this type of generosity, well, it can see ministry flourish with you also getting a tax benefit. But how should Christians invest money to increase their financial resources and be more generous? Well, the Barefoot Disciple, well, it talks about the concept of impact investing, which is investing in organisations that solve problems or satisfy wants, and they also return a profit. There are lots of different options out there. See, an investment in a certain mining company can see a good financial return, and it can also help the environment. See, if we need more battery-powered vehicles, batteries to power our houses, well then we need more resources to allow this energy transition to happen, like copper, nickel and lithium. Yes, don't invest in brown coal. That's not very good, okay? But investing in responsible mining companies, which will help minimise environmental impacts and help our economy to transition, actually fits into this concept of impact investing. Another concept that comes up in the book is investing in yourself. This means you might spend money to improve your knowledge or skills, which may improve your career prospects or a skill that will help you love and serve others. It doesn't just have to be a master's degree to get a leadership position in an organisation. It could be a counselling or pastoral care course so that you can love and care for others better. Now, I feel when you start looking into it, there are so many ways which we can wisely steward and invest our resources which are entrusted to us by God to give glory to Him. Yes, the Barefoot Disciple has heaps. The Money, Faith and Finance has many examples as well. But just before Paul comes up, here are some very practical ones. If you have money which you aren't using at the moment to pay for your weekly expenses, you could put this money into a high interest rate savings account rather than leave it in an account which pays no interest. If you have a home loan, you could set up a redraw facility or an offset account if your home loan product allows this. This means you can put money that you don't need immediately into your loan to reduce the interest you pay. And then you can draw this money if you need it. Depending on your investment time frame and the amount of risk you want to take, just remember even the faithful servants in the parable, well, they took some risk, didn't they? You could buy shares or exchange traded funds. You could start off investing in names or brands that you know. Bunnings, for example. Their owner is Wesfarmers, which is one of the biggest diversified companies in Australia. You can invest in an exchange-traded fund, which usually holds lots of companies in a managed fund setup, but as the name suggested, these stocks or these parts of these exchange-tradable funds are actually traded on the stock exchange like any other share. EFTs, well, they require a smaller amount of money to start investing compared to shares. And there are lots of these in existence. Going back to my example, well, you can invest in one that relates to battery technology. And this fund will directly invest in companies that mine certain resources all the way through to electric vehicle manufacturers. Maybe first invest in shares or EFTs which return a dividend. You might know that Australian companies also give you franking credits on dividends. What's that, you might ask? Well, a franking credit takes into consideration that Australian companies have paid 30% tax on their profits. So the tax office, well, it gives you a 30% credit on these dividends at tax time. Also, with your dividend, you might decide that you actually don't need the money, so you could be more generous with it. Friends, I'm not a financial advisor, and these are some very quick, practical examples. And why do I say these examples? Well, I say it with this question in mind. How are you stewarding your financial resources in your life stage? How are you stewarding your financial resources?